James, who's a friend of mine, was once a part of a small group that they called Spirit Garden. It was a group of 8 seminarians, lay leaders, and ministers who gathered in church basements to hold their own weekend-long retreats. When the group would arrive on a Friday night, they would then plan the weekend, together listing any topics or activities or worships that they wanted to make sure they got to during their weekends together. And then they put away the clocks. When Liz told me that, I cocked my head like a confused German shepherd. Wait, you put away all of the clocks? My own very strong internal impulse to plan started twitching in discomfort. Yep, Liz responded. We never knew what time it was. An interesting thing happened then. As the group went about its activities and conversations and worships throughout the weekend, they started evaluating their time differently. Instead of asking the questions, do we have enough time left to cover this? Or how much time do we have left? They were asking, is this a good use of our time together? And have we spent the right amount of time on this? This small shift continues to blow my mind. Our spiritual communities are places where we can practice living out our values, where we can experiment with different ways of letting our values shift how we do things. Liz's group gives a wonderful example of what it could look like to value taking the time that's needed rather than rushing to the next thing that was planned, and to express the value of inclusion by giving everyone gathered a chance to name what they wanted to talk through and cover. Some of our Unitarian Universalist values are countercultural. Our mainstream society teaches us to value efficiency, commodification, perfectionism, and a sense of urgency. For those who like to analyze things, you could say that this is the result of capitalism, that our worth is measured by what and how much we produce. Or you could say that it's a legacy of the Puritan work ethic, or also known as the Protestant work ethic, which taught our New England spiritual ancestors that diligence, hard work, and self-denial were pleasing to God, and that economic success was a sign of God's favor. Or you could say that these norms and standards are characteristic of white supremacy culture, as Kenneth Jones and Tema Okun have described them. And you'd probably be right about all of these. What I want to focus on today is what happens when we shift our priorities, when we center relationship, when we tend to the process so that we leave no one behind, when we're clear about our shared vision and work toward it together in covenant. As I've gotten to know this community at Theodore Parker Church, I've seen some really beautiful examples of this. From standing committee conversations that make a point of going around the Zoom room so that everyone can have their voices heard, to the way the planning ahead and COVID response team has focused their conversations around a shared value of protecting the most vulnerable among us, to the caring ministry team reading through shared covenants and a mission statement at the beginning of every year to ground themselves in their shared commitments, to lift up a line from the caring ministry team's covenant with the congregation, just to use as an example of this. They've written, "We hope that members and friends feel that they can belong, can reach out, grow in compassion and non-judgment about one another, give and receive generously, feel that they are cared for and valued, and that we can all bring our vulnerability to each other." I imagine that any group grounding their work in that hope and those values of generosity, vulnerability, and belonging would shape how they hold their meetings, how they communicate with one another, and how they communicate with other parts of the community. All of this has been really inspiring to see. Part of this whole period of interim ministry is shining a conscious light on who the congregation is, how it does things, and what it wants to do together. It's a time that calls us to be curious and reflective and to slow down enough to really be intentional, to see what we're up to that we want to build upon and what we might like to shift. Here's an example of one such reframe. On the Feminist Survival podcast, researcher and educator Emily Nagoski offers this teaching over and over, and it feels like it short circuits my brain every time I hear it. So here's what they like to say. When you think you need more grit, what you need is more help. When you think you need more discipline, what you need is more kindness. And when you think that someone else needs more grit, what they need is more help. And when you think that someone else needs more discipline, what they need is more kindness. Help and kindness prioritized over grit and discipline. This is not to say that dedication and hard work is a bad thing. Definitely not. But rather that we don't need to just suffer through when we could be asking for and receiving and offering support. How would the world be different if we shifted our focus toward help and kindness? How would churches be different? How would we be different as individuals? Perhaps by giving more help and kindness, by centering relationships, we would be putting more emphasis on process rather than product. This idea might be familiar to some of the educators in the room as the philosophy of the Montessori schools. The blogger and educational consultant R.B. Fast wrote, "The work that children do in the Montessori environment is all about process. Although there are often end results to the child's work that can be truly fantastic, it's the work leading up to the result that is what we truly value and encourage." Fast continues, "We are a very product-oriented society. We like things. You'll often hear adults grumble that kids today have no respect or work ethic. This is happening because we've moved away from emphasizing effort and instead look at results. When a child is making a picture, an adult will often say something like, 'Who is that for?' The answer to that is often that it isn't for anyone but the child that's making it. When we focus only on the thing that is the end result, we devalue everything that happened leading up to that result." Fast continues, "In the Montessori environment, when a child arranges flowers, for example, they're doing so to internalize the process. The flower arrangement is beautiful because it was made by a child who put all of their effort into making the arrangement in the way that feels best to them. The purpose of the activity is not to ensure that there are plenty of beautiful flowers all over the room, or for the child to be arranging the flowers to give to somebody. The purpose is that the child is developing focus, fine motor skills, a sense of order, and that they are going through a process of creation. They are satisfied by the act of creation. The arrangement itself is almost an afterthought to the child. Focus, motor skills, order, and process are not tangible items. Therefore," she concludes, "it becomes very easy to ignore it and focus on the flowers instead." What if instead we made sure to honor the child's effort and concentration? This concept is also a part of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. In the 1960s, Canadian Universalist religious educator Angus MacLean wrote a famous pamphlet called "The Method is the Message." The title pretty much speaks for itself. It's about practicing what we preach, that the way we do the thing is as important as the thing itself. I've also experienced that when we center relationship and process, we decenter perfectionism. And again, hard work and striving for excellence is not a bad thing. When I say perfectionism, I think about this teaching from vulnerability researcher Brené Brown, who says, perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. It's a shield, she says. It's a 20-ton shield that we lug around, thinking it will protect us, when in fact, she concludes, it's the thing that's preventing us from soaring. One place that I was so moved to see this reframe was in the report, Widening the Circle of Concern, which was put out by the Unitarian Universalist Association's Commission on Institutional Change. At the very end, there was this great little final note. It read, "This report and the accompanying video recording are not flawless. Perfection is neither an aspiration nor an achievement, as it comes from a cultural model we reject. We conducted this work in good faith and within the boundaries of limited time and assistance, in hopes that these general insights may be helpful." I love that. Not aspiring to perfection or waiting until it's perfect to put it out into the world, but rather acting in good faith within the bounds of limited time and resource and trying to be of service. Similarly, a colleague of mine, Reverend Rachel Hayes, told me that every time something goofs in a Zoom service, she or somebody else was muted while trying to speak, or the video didn't play, she would come back by saying, "We're not here for rephrase this, this is perfect. We're here for connection, not perfection." It was just as much a reminder to her to stay present and connected as it was for the congregation to not sweat their low production value moments. So what are we shifting to? I keep coming back to the work of Adrienne Marie Brown. Perhaps her most famous work is the book Emergent Strategy, which is exactly what we've been talking about. She defines emergent strategy as ways for humans to practice being in relationship to our home and each other, to practice complexity, and to grow a compelling future together through relatively simple interaction. Emergent strategy is how we internally change in ways that grow our capacity to embed the just and liberated world we long for. Each week here, we say that love is the spirit of this congregation. Love invites us home. Love says we belong unconditionally. Love does not demand our perfection because none of us have that. Love sees the effort we have made on behalf of our people, our species. It reminds us that we are still in the beginning of co-creating a new world, and that if we can give each other and ourselves grace, then together we can build resilience. If we can remember that growth is not linear, but iterative, then we can always be ready to change and adapt. And if we can practice reflection and radical honesty, then we can see that nothing is wasted or a failure. Emergence, she says, is a system that makes use of everything in the iterative process. It's all data. Good people of Theodore Parker Church, church is a place where we can practice being countercultural, where we are together for connection, not perfection. Let's notice the water that we're swimming in, a culture that values product over process, commodification over community. This time of interim ministry is a chance to shine a conscious light on who this congregation is, how things are done, and what we want to do together. To see what we're up to that we want to build upon and what we might like to shift. Let's give our brains a chance to short circuit and try something else. Let's center help and kindness, curiosity and reflection, love. So may it be.